the FlyFishing and Tying Journal, giant rainbows in Klamath Falls, and much more today on the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today. We'll help you on your fly fishing journey with classic stories covering steelhead fishing, fly tying, and much more.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show. There are a couple ways to go deeper with the podcast. The first big one is if you go to wetflyswing.com/destination to get info on the upcoming Alaska trip and a bunch of the other hosted trips I have going on in the next year or so. Secondly, if you want to support the podcast on a quicker level, you can go to wetflyswing.com/members and join the Member Society, which is a good way to quickly provide some extra support there. And please share this episode. That's probably maybe the easiest one with one other person you think might enjoy this show. In today's episode, I talk with Craig Schuhmann, the editor of the FlyFishing and Tying Journal. We hear about Craig's excessive habits with fly tying books, the edible emerger, the missing link, and the seal bugger again. We've talked about a couple of those already, but they're such big hitters, it's good to jump back into it. Find out the details of how to find a 30-inch rainbow in Stillwater. And don't miss this one, as we're about to hear upcoming changes with the Fly Fishing and Tying Journal. There's definitely some new things coming out here, and we're going to dig into that. So without further ado, how's it going, Craig?
Great to be here. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, good to have you on. It's been a little bit since we've talked. I guess was it Albany? I think we ran into
Albany.
each other, right? Yeah, had a good conversation there about kind of everything going on, and it's pretty cool. I didn't realize actually that you were down on one of my favorite places to fish on the Williamson in that area.
That's right. Yeah.
Nice. Well, we're going to jump into some of that today, but also obviously on the magazine, Fly Fishing and Tying Journal, we're going to get into that. But maybe you can just start us off and tell us how you first got into fly fishing, and then how that all came into being an editor of the magazine.
Yeah, well, that's a long story, Dave. I'll try to keep it short. I've been fly fishing most of my life. I started as a really young kid with my dad in the Sierras, actually, on the Owens River. Casting little Adams dry flies to small brown trout. I was probably 9, and we were living in LA at the time. And my dad had a deep love for fly fishing. Once he got into it and got hooked, he really just threw himself into it. So around 1980, my dad relocated to Portland, Oregon, and he started steelhead fishing. In fact, that's why he moved to Portland, was to steelhead fish. And he was steelhead fishing with an old guide up there named George Mackey. Do you know George Mackey or Steelhead George?
Yeah, I've heard of that name. Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah.
So this was the guy Dad fished with, mostly on the Washington rivers, the Columbia tributaries. And so a lot of winter steelhead fishing. A lot of fishing on the Deschutes. Dad had a sled. So I just kind of grew up around it. It was somewhat of a generalist, every once in a while we pull on plugs or side drift and row or something like that. But because he didn't like to winter steelhead fish with a fly. He liked to do that during the summer. So he was also a big fan of spring creeks. And so we found ourselves driving over to Idaho and Wyoming and occasionally fishing some of these spring creeks like Silver Creek. And, I was still pretty young, and I had other things I really would rather have been doing. And I was a skier. So, but he just continually dragged me along. And I don't know, I was probably 22 and I moved to Jackson Hole, and I moved there to ski. And we had this really crappy winter. And so I started working in an Orvis store there. And this is when really the accumulated knowledge of my fly fishing I didn't realize how much I knew. And that's really where I started to dive into it, is when I was working for Orvis and hanging around other fly. I had really not hung around other fly fishermen at that time.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, kids my age and girls. We had a girl that was working there.
Oh, what year was that when you went to the Orvis shop?
So this would have been, I'm thinking here, wow. Before 2000, so this would have been like 98.
Okay.
I want to say 97, 98. No, actually before that, because this is before I got married. So this would have been 94, 95.
Okay.
So I started, as I got more, engaged, started driving up to the Madison, and I was driving up to the park in Yellowstone, and gradually I just kind of, I moved back to Portland. I couldn't afford to ski anymore. I had to kind of get a real job. And so in a sense, it kind of became a default sport for me. It just hit me just right. And I don't know, it was probably it was 2004. I had, Dad and I were still fishing a lot. We were taking trips, and I started asking the guides that we were going with, what's it like to be a guide? My interest really started to get piqued. And there was this guy in Montana named Holden, really nice guy, right about my age, and just an amazing angler. And he answered a lot of my questions, and I knew, sitting in that bar with my dad and Holden, I knew that I was headed in that direction. So from Portland, I decided that I was going to move to Klamath Falls and fish and guide on the Williamson River.
Why Klamath Falls?
Well, my dad and I had been fishing down here for about 4 or 5 years, and we just couldn't get enough. I mean, we were coming down here and living in the campground for like 2 weeks and just doing nothing but fishing on the wood and the Williamson. And I absolutely just fell in love with it. I mean, it just felt like my river, and the way you catch the fish down here, it so mimicked the steelhead fishing we were doing up on the Deschutes,
Yeah. With
nice swinging with the intermediate line and that great grab that you get on the swing, and it felt like my style of fishing. And so, and I had been to a lot of other places to fish, but nothing struck me quite like this, nor the fish. And the size of the fish. I mean, that's a factor.
Yeah.
It's when you're catching big trout, that's certainly a hook. So, anyways, so I came down here. I didn't know a soul. I mean, nobody. I had one friend down here. No one in the guiding community. No one in the fishing community. I started, trying to meet the guides here in town, set up a couple lunches. Didn't know. I mean, I'd drive through the campgrounds and look for people to take fishing. I'm like, hey, you want to go fishing? I mean, I just needed people in the boat on the river and I just kind of knew what I needed to do. So that's what I was doing. And then an outfitter who saw me on the river quite a bit kind of recruited me for a couple of years. And he started throwing me a ton of clients. That was very helpful. Opened up a little tiny fly shop here at a specialty sporting goods store, helped him get started. It was called The Ledge. And
what was it called?
It's called The Ledge.
Oh, The Ledge.
He's actually a rock climber. He's got a rock climbing gym, and he wanted to kind of diversify a little bit and put in a little fly shop because he knew that there was a lot of great fly fishing around here. So 2005, we opened that up, and I don't have anything more to do with that shop, but it's still there. Mm-hmm. And so it's been, 13, I think I'm in my 14th year down here now. So, time, patience, passion, persistence.
Yep.
Certainly all true, and it pays off. Yeah.
14 years. Yeah. You're pretty much, I mean, that's a really good, that's a good chunk of time. I mean, when you look back at that, there's, what do you think of? I mean, obviously it sounds like you were all in at that one point, when you look back, you knew you were in. And you know, and it's still not easy. You just go down there. What do you think was the hardest part of making this a business and doing it for 14 years now?
Well, there's a lodge down here called the Lonesome Duck, and the head guide for Lonesome Duck is Marlon Rampy.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And so I really wanted to work for the Lonesome Duck, and I would see Marlon on the water, and I could not get my foot in the door. Mm-hmm. And I didn't understand why. I had a few conversations with Marlon, but really nothing was materializing. So after about 5 or 6 years of guiding, he approached me and, you know, hey, how would you like to run some trips for the Lonesome Duck? And I'm like, sure. I later came to find out from Marlon that he doesn't use anyone for the Lonesome Duck that he hasn't seen on the river for at least 5 or 6 years.
Oh, there you go.
So I was putting in my time, you know, I was definitely being watched. I mean, we had a lot of, well, not a lot, but, you know, a handful of guides that had been guiding on the river for, you know, 25 years. I mean, old guys. One of them guided Jimmy Carter down here. Mm-hmm. And these guys were seasoned. They had customs for fishing the river. You did not use indicators when I first started down here. You would have been pulled over to the side and talked to had you used an indicator. Yeah. And so very specific, and there was even certain like little types of water that you couldn't fish because they were known to be spawning areas or something. And you couldn't break custom without, you know, geez, who knows, beyond conversation, they may have started spiking your tires for all I know. So I guess the hardest part really was it wasn't even so much the clients that I had on the mind or making money. That wasn't the thing. The thing was getting into that guide community, getting to work for a lodge like the Lonesome Duck, and then just the brute work it took to actually become proficient on the river, because it can be a very difficult river. That was my focus. I just wanted to become the kind of angler that I saw in the other guides that I knew and the guides that my dad and I had took. And I wanted to know the river as intimately and on a daily basis as those people did. And so I think, to answer your question, Dave, that was probably the biggest challenge. The business stuff just kind of followed. It followed in the wake of all that, you know.
Gotcha.
So that wasn't the real concern. And I had another job, so I wasn't. Yeah. I tried to make it a few years with only that and some writing, but and that's actually when I started writing. But I couldn't do it full time. It was just I couldn't sustain myself. We have a fairly short season down here. It's only 5 months. Right. So, and I wasn't going to head to the coast to steelhead fish because I had a family, and that was too tough. So
yeah, you're not going to head up to like some guides do. I talked to you know, people. Yeah, they do. They go 6 months up to Alaska or whatever they have to do to guide, and you know, and then come back to their hometown. Yeah, that's not easy to do.
It sounds great. If I were single, not married with a kid, I would have. That would have been my lifestyle, no doubt about it. But
that's right. Okay, so and then how did the magazine, the Fly Fishing and Tying Journal, how did that come to be?
Well, that was interesting. So I had written up to that point. I had written one book that came out in 2006, and I walked into Frank Amato's one day.
What was that book?
So that was called Fishing Oregon. And it was a Moon Outdoors book. So Moon has like a series of books: Fishing California, Fishing Oregon, Fishing. Yeah. Yep. It was actually Foghorn originally, and then it changed to Moon. Okay. And it was a comprehensive book to Oregon, and it wasn't a fly fishing book. It was a general fishing book. Mm-hmm. And it took me about a year and a half to write, and that book just about killed me. And that was like my first thing I'd ever done. And so I got through that, And then I started trying to sell myself around to various magazines. Northwest Fly Fishing picked up a little thing of mine. Dave Klausmeyer with Fly Tire Magazine picked up a few things of mine. Actually, I learned a lot from Dave Klausmeyer because he was a hard ass editor, and he'd just write you back and just tell you what he thought. I really did. I cut my teeth very quickly with Dave.
And you like that? I mean, what would it have been if he wasn't that type?
Oh yeah. No, I appreciated his honesty, and it gave me an understanding where editors are coming from, because I really didn't know. But Dave tells me, he's like, Craig, I got this giant cardboard box in my office, and I get tons of submissions, and 90% of those submissions end up in that cardboard box, and that goes to the dump. Yeah. He said, here's how you get my attention. And so he kind of gave me some tips on how to approach editors and how to be a freelance writer, and basically bend to the will of the editor. Don't think you're better than everybody else, and that the editor should just accept your work, because that's the best way to wind up in that cardboard box. Yep. And so
what were those? What were those tips, or what was one of them?
Those tips.
Yeah. Was there a big one that somebody might take that wants to write for, say they want to write for your magazine?
Yeah. Well, two things really. Word count for one thing. The first article I turned into him was 5,000 words.
Oh wow.
He wanted 2,500.
Yeah.
He called me up as soon as he got that, and he said, give me one good reason why this article should not go in the box. He said, I asked for 2,500 words. You gave me 5,000. I mean, I almost sounded offended.
Yeah.
So he's like, he did me a favor. He says, I'm going to do you a favor this time. I'm going to cut this down for you. I'm going to publish it, but I will never do this again for you. He says, when I give you a word count, I expect you to stick to it. In another later piece, I wrote the article, turned it in. He called me. He said, Craig, this looks fine, but you missed something in the article. There's this bunch of this fly tying material that just came out, and you didn't cover it in the article. I can't publish it until you do that. Yep. So I kind of dragged my feet on that one. I didn't really want to go back and rewrite anything, and he never ended up publishing that article. I never got it published. So listen to the direction that editors give you, because they're not giving you those directions just because. They're giving it to you because that's what they need. And you need to be fairly responsive into getting that to them. Otherwise, you're going to hurt their trust. And I'd say trust is the most important thing between a writer and editor. He needs to know that you're going to turn in what you say you're going to turn in, that is going to fit the format that they're looking for, and you need to do that on time. Yeah. And something that, he had a sliding scale that he paid writers on. So if you turned in something that required, say, 2 hours of his editing before it could be published, well, then he was going to cut your pay accordingly. So he said, the more polished piece you give me, the more money you're going to make.
There you go.
And so that was kind of incentive.
Yeah.
I'd say some of the biggest learning curves for me was, say, combining the skills of photography and writing and interviewing. So learning how to interview someone, remembering to take pictures when you're writing that story. So let's say you're writing the story on the Deschutes, and you take a camera, but pictures are an afterthought. That's a huge mistake, because that's going to be a huge part of your article. If you just focus on the writing, or at least bring a photographer, bring someone who can take pictures for you, so you can just concentrate on the writing. So it's a bit of a multidisciplinary, approach for some, where they are the photographer, they're the writer, they do it all.
And would you say that is for most? I mean, what would you say the people that write for the magazine? You probably have a very diverse, group. But if you look back at the last few years, are a majority of them people that are writing on the side, or is it a full time thing? Or what would you say?
Most of them are freelancers writing on the side.
Okay.
Yep,
So
they have
freelancers,
other jobs.
So they have other jobs, right?
Yep. Very few. In fact, I can only think of really one full-time writer, and that's Gary Lewis.
Yeah, Gary. Yeah, which I had on. I had Gary on in a previous episode. I'll put that in the show notes. It was. Yeah, he's a good guy.
He is, and I can remember the year that I would talk to him on the phone. He says, "Yeah, Craig," he says, "I've gone full time." I'm like, "What do you mean you've gone full time?" He says, "I've gone full time as a writer." You know, he had to take. What he was telling me is that he took that leap of faith that he could do this full time.
Yeah.
Which is really tough. And he's got a TV show. I mean, he's really made something of himself. Yeah. Which is really impressive. I'm close to Gary, and I watch him and what he does. And in fact, we just shot a TV show up on Diamond Lake. Oh, no kidding. About a few weeks ago, catching tiger trout.
Is that gonna be come out on YouTube, or?
It's gonna come out on his channel. Yeah.
I'll put a link
sometime in April.
Yeah, I'll put a link. I'm sure that I'll get a link here next year on it. So okay.
Yeah. That was fun. I had never caught tiger trout before, and they're a fierce little fish. I really enjoyed fishing for them.
Tiger trout is a mix. What is it? It's a mix between browns and rainbows, or what is it?
And brooks.
It's the three.
No, just browns and brooks.
Oh yeah, just browns and brooks. That's right.
So they're a char. Both those species, and I don't think either of those species can intermix with rainbow because they're a separate species.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
browns and brooks. That's cool.
So let's see. So that, wow, okay, a few tangents there. Anyways, so Dave Klosmeyer at Fly Tire helped me out. Steve Probusco up at Northwest Fly Fishing before John Shuey took it over, And so I walked into Frank Amato's office one time and I asked for Frank. They said, "There he is at the back of the office. Go introduce yourself." So I just made a beeline for him, handed him my book, said, "Frank, I want to write for you." And he sat on that book for about 6 months. I didn't hear a word from him. And I thought, oh, well, I've lost my shot. I thought, finally, he gives me a call. He says, "Craig, I was really impressed with your book. You seem organized. No one could write a book like this that's not organized." And he started giving me assignments. And so I really threw myself into FGJ, not only because I liked Frank and the magazine, but it was just the most available option for me. And he was so receptive to my work. Mm-hmm. And I believe he may have been editing the magazine at the time. I think this was after Dave Hughes had left or something.
Oh, Dave Hughes was there, right?
Dave Hughes and Rob Crandall is the one that was the editor of right before I was.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, that's what I was going to try to get into, is a little bit of the history there of the magazine.
Yeah, I'm not sure how long Rob Crandall edited. Sorry, Rob. I want to say it was about maybe 3 years or something.
Okay, yeah.
Frank did it.
How long did he do it for?
Well, Frank, I believe, was in between Dave Hughes and Rob Crandall. I want to say Frank probably did it for a couple years.
Oh, wow. So he's got obviously all these I want to dig in a little bit to Frank's background a little bit too, just because he's obviously got a lot of stuff and history there and stories. But
it's amazing.
But we're not going to be able to get to it all. But Crandall, I just did want to note, I interviewed Rob, and a great steelhead episode. Yeah. He went into a bunch of steelhead tips. That was good. And Dave Hughes. Hopefully, I want to get Dave on as well. So I just haven't been able to get him on yet. So
yeah.
So okay, so basically that's it. You go in and you start doing your stuff, and then eventually you have this opportunity and probably just hop in as the editor. Was it pretty smooth to get into that role?
Oh, it took, let's see. Frank started coming down and fishing with me on the Williamson. And when we were fishing, we would talk. And so I had some ideas. So the first time he came down, I had an idea for a book, and we talked about it and changed the idea a little bit. And I ended up writing another book for him at that point called 40 Great American Trout Flies. And so I wrote that. That took about a year. Well, actually about 8 months. But the next year he came down to go fishing, and we were talking about, and he was kind of looking for an editor at that time. I think Rob was getting really involved with his steelhead fishing. And so he was looking for an editor, and at that point I had to pipe up. I'm like, Frank, I can do that. I'd love to. And of course, Frank took some time to think about that, and then eventually came back with an offer. So it was a series of writing assignments, books, and because I'd written 2 books for him, Get Started Fly Fishing, and then 40 Great American Trout Flies. It was just that relationship that kind of built up over probably about 5 years.
Yeah.
And I remember the call where he calls and says, Craig, he says, you got the job if you want it. And it really felt like Christmas morning.
No kidding.
I was just like, oh yeah, I was so stoked.
No kidding. That's so, and that is, that, so you get this job. What's the, what are the next steps? What's the first thing? Do you get into it and realize that it is a lot of work, or was it greater, or what was it like compared to what you thought it would be like?
Well, honestly, Dave, I didn't know what it was going to be like. I mean, I didn't realize, first of all, how big of a staff that he had up there, and how involved the staff were in the production of the magazine. And this is just because Frank's has, I mean, how many magazines does he produce? Well, he has 3, but really he's only had 2 for many years. Okay. That's Salmon Trout Steelheader and FlyFishing and Tying Journal, which has changed names a couple times. It has. It has. And what else has it been? What? Don't ask me that history, because I don't even have it straight in my mind. We won't worry. That's not that important. But, so I always think of Frank. When I think of Frank, I think of a bunch of magazines. But I guess it's all the book publishing that he does that makes you think that, because he does have a big. I mean, there's how many, right? Hundreds and hundreds of books that he's published. Oh yeah. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, the publisher, and if you get Frank on the show, you can ask him this. I think it started with FlyFishing and Tying Journal in its former life, when it was named something else. That's where Frank started, was with that magazine. That was the first magazine, and then Salmon Steelheader. Yeah, I think that was his first publishing venture. Was the magazine. Okay. Yeah. So it's really, near and dear to his heart, FlyFishing and Tying Journal, because it's been with the company since the very beginning. I mean, it launched his publishing career. That's really, in the very beginning. I know I've heard some stories about Frank, how, working in the supermarket before, like trying to pay the bill, starting out very slim. And then he builds us into, this big publishing, out here, it is kind of a publishing dynasty, because everybody knows Frank Amato. It's a book. Right. He's a big name. Well, now I want to get back to that 40 Great American Trout Flies, just because I always ask a question on this, the kind of the top flies and stuff. Was that a, like, here's the top 1 and here's the 4, or are they just a bunch, here's the top 40? Did you have a list of which one was the best? I had to create the list. And so really my process of doing that was just to look at the really the most traditional flies that a West Coast fly angler would have been using for like the last 20 to 30 years for trout. Dries, nymphs, everything. Yeah, dries, nymphs, streamers, all the categories. What was the number 1? What was the biggest fly, the best fly, if you had to pick one? It would probably be the why aren't I thinking the name? The hare's ear. Oh yeah, the hare's ear. Yeah, the hare's ear. I think because it's the oldest fly. Oh, it is. Hare's ear, yeah. It's the oldest fly. I mean, like in the history of fly fishing for trout, it's probably one of our oldest flies. Yeah. In various various iterations down through the centuries, and it is still used with regularity today as much as it's ever been. And it happens to be a fly that I don't use. I didn't even want to put it in the book.
No kidding.
Yeah, but I had to. I couldn't ignore that fly.
So what do you not what do you not like about the hare's ear?
It's not a fly that appeals to me.
Yeah.
I find it it doesn't sink great, without adding a lot of weight to it. I just find a lot of other trout flies sexier and that I have more confidence in, and I've just never taken the time to build confidence in that fly.
Yeah.
So, I had to put it in the book just because it was one, even though I didn't use, was very important. I'd say probably the fly that if I had to give myself a number one fly, it would be a fat flashback pheasant tail.
Yeah.
Like a size 18.
Exactly.
I can't beat. I mean, that is a fly that I have confidence in, that I use all the time, and is fairly old. A lot of tradition coming from England.
Yep.
So I learned a lot about flies going through that book, because I had to research the backgrounds of all of them, and the focus of the book was not tying, although I did include the recipe. I wanted to give the history of the fly, and then really what I want to do is break down the elements of the fly and why the fly worked.
Yeah.
So really look at the individual properties of the fly tying material, like peacock, like tinsel, like. That's
cool.
And a lot of this I'm having to think through as I'm doing it, because there wasn't a lot of them. So, there are my opinions on why those flies work and why that combination of materials work. But I also got to talk to some tyers like Brian Sylvie up on the Deschutes about his fly. And those were my questions that I put to the tyers.
What is Sylvie's fly?
It's the the edible emerger.
Oh, the edible emerger. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had been using that down on the Williamson quite a bit. And I'm like, damn, this fly really works.
Yeah.
So that's a newer fly that went in the book.
How about the, you got to have this, I'll put a link in the show notes to the book, but did you have the, what is Mike Mercer's fly? I've talked about this a couple times on here. The missing link. Did you get that one?
Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. The missing link, it's classic. I mean, this fly is, I'm going to tell the story one more time because I just told it on a recent podcast, but it's ridiculous. I asked him the same question. I always ask everybody, what are your top two flies if you had to go with two? Okay. And I think the missing link, I think that was his fly. And so I went down the Deschutes, the next weekend I was up doing that, Trout Creek float. And I mean, it was every cast, and I'm not joking. It was just, and that's what he said too. He said the fly was like every cast, so he quit using it. It works so good.
Really? Okay.
Anyways, it's basically like an elk hair caddis, but it's got kind of a different wing and it's got some flash, and I don't know. So I love highlighting that because it's just it worked so well for me. But no, so you have this book. Yeah, you have this book that's got a bunch of amazing, great so new and old flies.
Yeah, new and old flies. I think the newest one is the Dragonator, and I'm sorry I forgot the guy's name, but he lives in Bend. Yeah, streamer angler, competition angler, came up with this fly.
So I wanted to definitely dig in on the magazine. So basically, we've talked a little bit about the history there, but can you describe for somebody? It is one of the biggest magazines out there in the fly fishing space. Probably a lot of people have read that. Yeah, have read it. It's great. I mean, you cover a lot of the, the tips and tricks and things like that. Can you describe to somebody who's never read it what it's all about and what they could expect?
Yeah. So when I first started working for the magazine, I would classify it as kind of a traditional fly fishing magazine where you would expect to find destination articles, so, places to fish, and you're going to find a lot of how-to information, how to use an indicator, how to set up a nymph rig, how to fish a dry fly, how to cast. And then you might find in the back of the magazine an essay, which would be kind of a thoughtfully written piece, thinking about fly fishing.
What's a good example of, I'm not sure, I know the recent summer edition that's out. I can't remember what the essay was in the back of that one, but was there something there, or you can give example, or was there,
Yeah. Well, Tom Alkire, I don't know if any of your listeners are familiar with Tom Alkire. He writes books, and they're all essays on fishing, and they're reflective essays, kind of even philosophical essays. He wrote one called, I can't think of the name of one.
I'll put the link in. I'll find it. It's from the. Okay. Is this one from the recent edition or from... It's not from a recent edition. The most recent one, was actually a story written by Mike, or no, not Mike. And I
forgot.
I can get all these. No, yeah, I can get all these links.
McCafferty.
McCafferty. Oh, yeah, McCafferty.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. He wrote the Royal Wolf murder mystery stories.
Huh.
And that was more of a story. That wasn't an essay. So, and the Tail Out, which is the kind of the last article in the magazine, that's usually where you get your reflective piece or your essay. If I can think of one of them, Dave, as we're talking, I can get back to that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no worries.
Question.
So basically, you guys cover a little bit of everything, a little bit of destination, a little bit of fly tying, fly fishing. I mean, when people are coming to you, like you said, you got this, some magazines have this big box of things that don't get published. I mean, how do you choose what to publish and what to, like say, for example, the summer edition that came out, how do you choose what goes, what are the topics, and what to put out there?
Well, so you kind of follow the format of what the magazine has been, because that's what readers have come to expect from that magazine. So if you have readers thinking of the magazine as kind of an old friend, when it comes to their mailbox every time, they kind of know what they're looking for, and you want to maintain that format. So in this particular case, most of our readers of fly fishing magazines do tend to be beginning, intermediate, and I'd say slightly better than intermediate anglers. They're looking for information. Advanced anglers traditionally, they'll flip through a magazine, but there's usually not a lot in there for them.
Yeah.
Because they've done it. They know the stuff. It's kind of, just rudimentary. So fly fishing magazines in general, it's changed, but have been geared towards the sort of beginning fly fishing audience.
Yep.
We've kind of changed the format of Fly Fishing and Tying Journal over the last few years. We have gone, I have tried to get more advanced fly tying articles in the magazine to appeal to more advanced fly tiers. So I find a guy that's a really good fly tyer like Dave McNeese. And I have him write a series of fly tying articles for me, and I call him the writer, fly tyer in residence. And I have him write 4 advanced fly tying articles. They have to be original patterns, something that is not readily available on the internet. So I want to try to find the most original content I can find that's not just duplicating what's online.
Yeah.
And that's been a big challenge.
Yeah, it is. Right, because everything's online.
Everything is online. So I got to find these guys who are originators and creators.
And even a new fly that somebody creates today, somebody else out there might see it and be like, somebody already made that fly 40 years ago, right?
Yeah. Yes, that definitely happens.
Do you think it's a West Coast magazine? I mean, I know you cover a lot of everything, but do you try to focus on a Western thing, or do you, how do you keep it from becoming that, or what's your thoughts there?
I try to keep it. I try to have a national focus, right? But it has a very West Coast bias because that's where I'm from. That's where I learned. And a majority of my writers are on the West Coast. I do work hard to get East Coast anglers, Southern anglers. I have a couple saltwater guys. Mm-hmm. And the more of them I can find, the more diverse the magazine becomes. But if I were just to pick from my usual lot of writers, we would not be west of the Rock, or we wouldn't be east of the Rocky Mountains.
East of the Rockies,
it'd be it'd be the Rockies to the Pacific.
Yeah.
And Frank, this is Frank's direction. You know, he's like, we used to be a Northwest magazine. We went and to have a national appeal.
Yeah.
And Frank's claim is that that's when Northwest Fly Fishing stepped in.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, because we were no longer Northwest centric. Northwest Fly Fishing came in and made a Northwest centric magazine, and they did it. They had a great model because they did what? They do 4 of them, all kind of regional. Yeah, which is great. Yeah.
And that magazine's obviously a little different. They focus on destinations more than they do the tips and tricks. And I do want to get into the Williamson River, because definitely that is a sweet river. Before we get there, I just want to check on one thing. Who are the other tips and tricks magazines?
Well, Fly Fisherman magazine.
Fly Fisherman, yeah.
They do tend to be real heavy on tips and tricks.
Yeah, okay. So you got them.
Techniques.
So it's pretty much you, Fly Fisherman. Is that it? Are there any other? I mean, Northwest Fly Fisherman probably has some of that mixed in there. How to do it?
Not a lot. I mean, other than just some fly. He's definitely expanded the fly tying.
Oh yes,
articles in that magazine. Yeah, I love his format. By the way, I think he's just really fine-tuned that format. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. I mean, because if you look at stuff like the Drake and Angler's Journal and some of those other things,
right. Yeah,
they're more culture magazines.
They are.
Yeah.
Yeah, the journal, the Fly Fishing Journal, all that stuff. Yeah. So I think to answer my own question, I think that. And a lot of people, I brought that up, but a lot of people have said that there's room in fly fishing for, tips and tricks and everything else because, people are interested in that. And that's the way I see it. I know people that listen to this love some of the tips and tricks we get into. And Orvis podcast is a big tips podcast.
Absolutely.
As well. So,
and I was going to say, it depends on what venue you're bringing that up in. And I think, and you just hit on a perfect example, Rosenbauer's Orvis podcast. I listen to it and I enjoy the hell out of it.
It's huge.
I mean, it is. And you learn a lot from Tom himself. I think that is a great venue for listening to tips and tricks. Mm-hmm. And I can't imagine anyone really disagreeing with that.
No.
I think what maybe they're suggesting is that the fly casting 101, the nymphing 101 that they see in the magazines, that stuff is pretty available online, and I can see where people could be tired of that for sure.
Yeah, and that's probably it. Yeah. Okay, well let's jump into your home water, and maybe just talk about what you consider your home river, and then talk about how you catch fish there. And I don't know you said the Wood and Williamson, are they pretty much pretty similar enough that you could talk about both of them together, or would you like to pick out one?
I need to talk about them a little bit separate because they are, just in terms of volume, the Wood is a much smaller river.
Oh, okay.
It also has brown trout in it, which the Williamson has a few, but not to the extent that the Wood has. The Wood really traditionally is a brown trout fishery with this, occasional migration of red bands running up the river, and more in the fall.
Yeah. So the Williamson is more of your kind of like you're saying, your steelhead, similar techniques as the steelhead fishing.
The Williamson, yeah.
Well, let's. Unless you have a preference, I fished the Williamson.
Yeah. The Williamson, that's our bread and butter.
Okay,
cool. That's our river that I'm on 80% of the time.
There you go. So let's dig into that a little bit. I haven't been down there in a little while, but I remember when I was down there, I was with somebody who kind of knew the area a little bit, and we were floating it, and you know, you were picking these spots, which, you know, I wouldn't know anything about the spot if I wasn't with somebody. So that, you know, obviously having the guide was big. Can you talk about how you catch fish there and just take us to the river? And are you drift boats? Are you walking? And how you do it?
So mostly from drift boats, at least the guiding, because there's so much private property. Your river access is very limited. There's a few spots you can wade and fish, like up at Collier Park, but it's pretty restrictive. If you have a boat or a pontoon boat, you'll be much better off. So, I mean, and we have one put in and one take out.
Oh, no kidding. It's just one put in.
Yeah, I mean, one official put in, and that's the county park up at the confluence of the Sprague and the Williamson. Oh, yeah. And our takeout is below the highway bridge at the Water Wheel Campground.
Okay.
There's a couple takeouts below there, but, you know, mostly you're in frog water at that point.
Oh, okay.
Which is very productive fishing on the Williamson, but that's a lot of river between the put in and the takeout.
How many miles is that?
It's right around maybe 6 miles, maybe.
Yep.
And I'd say 2.5 of those are frog water.
Okay.
So this isn't a river where you are looking for a lot of traditional freestone river type fishing. The Williamson is a spring creek. The Sprague is a freestone river, and those two converge and form the bulk of the water that we fish. And so you have this sort of modified spring creek, and I say modified because it's big, like you'd find, you know, it's not as big as a Deschutes, but you know, it's a big, it's wide. 50
to 80 feet wide, right?
Yeah, and the CFS, you know, I think in the lows we're right around 600.
Yeah.
I want to say, and then, you know, it can get up to, I don't know, 1,500 maybe in the winter, the runoff.
It's decent.
So, but you have these, but you have kind of spring creek conditions, maybe tailwater type conditions where you have selective fish, hatches. You have very clear water, so got to keep your distance from the fish. And what I see most people doing, which is a mistake, is they go to the river and they head straight to the riffles like they would on any other river, which would make sense.
Yep.
Unfortunately, the big fish that you're after if you're coming to the Williamson do not hang out in the riffles, except maybe in the very beginning in the spring. So as hard as it is, don't go to those riffly areas. Where you really want to focus your attention is on the flats and the deeper pools.
Right.
Anything that mimics lake water, because all of these fish are lake-loving trout. That's where they probably prefer to stay most of the time. If they didn't have to get out of the lake, they probably wouldn't. So they come into the river, they find that familiar water, which is that lake-type water, and that's where they feed and hold. And
this is around structure, and you hear about the I'm not sure the name of the holes, but like the bed springs hole, right? You got all these old structures, but they hold it around. If you can find the structure, you'll find the fish.
Huge underwater ledges. Yeah. I mean, massive rock structure. These basalt formations underneath the water, which really amazes most people when they see it the first time. That structure is super important. There's going to be, it creates great habitat for the fish. So getting on the water and just drifting the river and looking at that structure, looking where you see fish holding, because you're going to go over the top of them, is a great way to orient yourself to the river. I mean, just leave your fly rod in the car, take a float down the river, and just look for fish.
Yep.
That would be very helpful rather than coming to the river thinking you know where the fish are, because that's going to make for an unsuccessful day because you're fishing water. It's very non-traditional, I would say, trout water. A steelhead angler would do better if they read the Williamson like a steelhead river than a trout angler who read it like a trout river.
Are you swinging like wet flies for these fish? Or, I mean, you talk about hatches, but can you get them on streamers and wet flies, things like that?
Well, primarily streamers.
Okay.
Yeah, so all these fish come into the river. They're eating leeches and bait fish out in the lake most of the time. They get into the river, and as Marlon says, these fish don't know what an insect is when they first come into the river. Right.
Wow.
So they're looking to chase down food, and so the seal bugger.
These are essentially.
Yeah, these are steelhead.
These are steelhead. I mean, they're the same species, obviously, but it's the ocean. You got the lake as their ocean, and they're coming in to do their thing, just like a steelhead would do. And how big are these fish? I mean, what's the biggest fish you've seen, and then what's the average?
So when I first came down here, the average fish was right around 18 to 20 inches. I would say, actually, maybe it was more like 20 to 22 inches. I would say that average has gone down just a little bit. It's probably more like 18. My largest fish landed is right around 32, 33 inches.
Wow.
And I would say on any given guided trip, most people at least get a shot at a 30-incher.
Wow. So you're talking like almost like a 10-pound fish.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Depending on the time of year, it could be 12 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yep. So we're talking big fish. And are you, gear wise, are you using more steelhead type gear, or what do you, how like maybe go through the
6
leader,
weights?
Yeah. Go through the leader line, kind of tip and setup.
Well, that's kind of you're fishing for the sort of landlocked steelhead, but it's a trout and it eats like a trout. So, we're down to 5X tippet.
Oh, yeah.
All fluoro. I don't even the only time I use mono is if I'm fishing dry flies. Otherwise, I'm completely fluorocarbon. But when the water clears, you got to go down to that 5X. And I use all 6 weights. I'll use 5 weights for dry flies occasionally, but when I'm fishing the streamers, and then I'm using a clear intermediate full sink line.
Oh, wow. That's
my swinging line.
There you go.
So, and I'd say we end up using that line probably 70% of the season.
No kidding. So you're basically, that gets you down so you don't have to use a ton of weight on your fly or anything like that?
No. Yeah, because we're using... so the fly really, which I think epitomizes the streamer fishing, is the Denny Rickards seal bugger.
Oh yeah, the seal bugger.
Yeah, and 8s and 10s, and then you can drop down a little smaller as the season goes along. That sparse little bugger with the dubbed body. That's what we're swinging.
I had Denny on in a past episode as well. I'll put a link to that one. It was kind of funny because he went into some of the entomology stuff and he covered. I mean, I thought it was a great episode. He really broke down, really made it simplified the lake. But we talked about lakes, obviously. So now we're talking about, this is pretty cool because now we're talking about rivers and we're kind of covering the whole thing.
Same fish. I mean, we're fishing over the same fish whether you're in the lake or you're in the rivers, but their characteristics change between those two spots, right? So you're fishing in the river, you're really fishing them like a steelhead or like a river trout, and in the lake, they act like lake fish. I mean, it's fascinating. Same fish.
Yep.
And I'll tell you, Denny Rickards, there's a fascinating history there between him and Jay Fair and a few other guys
who is Jay Fair's name has come up a few times. I've heard of it. What was his claim to fame, or how'd he was a pretty big name.
Yeah, so he was down on Eagle Lake in California, and he was a fly materials dealer, and he dyed his own feathers.
That's right.
And he came up with this fly tying material that was all in these earth tones, these mellow yellows, dirty yellows, olives, really muted tones, burnt orange, shades of brown. And those colors, a lot of those colors he developed on Eagle Lake, and they translated well up to Klamath Lake, where Denny and Jay fished a lot together. And because they're a very similar fish, the Eagle Lake trout and the Williamson red band are very similar in size and, behavior characteristics. So, and they respond to flies in a very similar way.
Gotcha.
And so Denny's seal buggers really originated from that. And Rich Henry also has a part to play in this. Rich Henry really came up with leech patterns for fishing the Williamson and the lake.
Isn't there a Native American guide or?
That's him.
That's okay. Yeah,
that's Rich.
Okay.
He lives down in Brookings now, and he's getting up there in age. Mm-hmm. But the man is just simply a legend.
He's the man. That's what you hear. Yeah, he's the man.
Yeah. So these guys all worked together, though. At one point, whenever this was in the 70s, developing all these techniques and styles and the sinking lines. And when I came down here and I was instructed on how to fish the river, I got really curious. I'm like, what? Why are we fishing the river this way? Who came up with this? Who discovered this? Why am I fishing for these trout like they're steelhead? And why can't I use indicators?
Right.
And, and you look back at the history of Polly Rossbro, because Polly Rossbro was very present when all these other guys were fishing the river.
Was he down in that area too?
Yeah, he was in Chiloquin.
Man,
he was on the river.
That place is loaded with a bunch of, obviously it has big fish.
I've talked to Randall Kaufman. Randall Kaufman used to come down here and fish all the time.
Yeah.
Dave Hughes and his whole crew, Ted Leeson,
it is amazing.
Schulmeyer.
It is amazing because we don't have, when you think of lakes, I mean, you could look across Klamath and not see the other side, right? I mean, it's gigantic.
Almost.
Almost. Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, for us, we're not, we don't have the Great Lakes next door, so we don't have that. But for us, Klamath is one of the big things we have.
Yeah. No, and the thing about Klamath Lake is it averages only like 6 to 8 feet deep.
That's right. That's crazy.
Yeah. So that creates, you get that warm water very quickly. You get those algae blooms, and those fish they want to bail out of the lake and get up into the spring areas.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So that's that and the fact that they spawn year round.
Oh, really?
So they're always moving up and down the rivers from the lake with the spawning.
Yeah.
And Bill Tenniswood, who is an ODF and W guy down here, has been radio tracking these fish. And these fish will move up to 900 miles in a season. One fish.
Wow.
They're up and down from north to south end of the lake. They're up multiple rivers.
Jeez.
He says the movement is crazy. I mean, they don't have a logical explanation for
why would they be moving so much? Yeah. Seems like that's
a lot of
energy. Yeah, they're steelhead, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. And historically, I think naturally, if you look at the geology, they may have been steelhead in the past, right? There may have been a connection.
Yes, they think there were steelhead and salmon in this basin because there's direct access from the lake all the way to the ocean via the Klamath River.
Exactly.
And they think that potentially, Robert Binke, who wrote North American Salmon and Trout Species, he was pretty convinced that there were steelhead genetics in our red band trout.
Yeah, exactly. It makes sense.
And so somewhere along the way they got mixed in.
Yeah, well, let's take it back. So we're back on the river, and say we're down there, and we've done our float through. We found some spots for fish hole. Now we're on the next trip, and we know where that spot is. We anchor up, I'm assuming kind of above, and then you're in the boat. I mean, are you just swinging like downstream and across with this little seal bugger with your line? Is that pretty simple, and that's it?
Yeah. That's in a nutshell. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So you're anchoring on every hole. We're not doing any side drifting or any fishing and moving really. And, it's perfecting that quartering down technique, getting a good mend and a really good swing and a good straight line swing so that fly is not only swinging, but it's sinking as well. Mm-hmm. It's dropping as it's coming through that hole. And where I find I get the most of my fish, if I'm doing it right, Dave, is right on the tail end of that swing. That's sometimes in the swing, but really at the tail end. And then I always
just before the hang down.
Yes, just before the hang down. That's usually where or it's that first strip.
Oh, you're stripping too.
Well, we do. We retrieve back, and you
just
catch
to retrieve,
a lot
right.
of. Yeah, the slower the water, the more you want to retrieve back.
Okay.
Faster water, maybe not so much, but that slower water, man, they see that thing moving through the water, and they'll just come up and strike it.
And I just had a new mess. I have these comments in the Facebook group, and that pop up, and one of them was that same exact thing. How do you get down, to the right depth on a river? And how would you say? I mean, obviously you have the right line. Is it pretty much that simple? Get the right line, and you'll get to the right depth, or do you do multiple mends as you're swinging? If
I fish with anything heavier than a clear intermediate, I would eventually hit the bottom, like a type 2, type 3, type 4, too heavy for a majority of the season. You'll hang up everywhere. The type 1 just seems to be just perfect. I mean, you'll hang up occasionally, and I don't even really worry about depth. I don't know necessarily how deep my fly is on that swing. What I'm watching is the angle of my fly line from my rod tip to my fly. I want to see that that's straight. And I work a lot of slack into that swing and into that drift, right? So I quarter down, I give it a little bit of mend, maybe even just a little lift mend, and then I'll just work a few feet of slack into that line to get it to start drifting down river, right? Yep. And then when I see that it's, drifted down riverways and it's sort of deep, I even stick my rod tip under the water, and then that swing starts, and I know I have a straight line to the fly, so then that starts swinging and drifting right down through that hole. So my concern here is not depth. I'm not worried about depth because I know these fish are going to rise to a fly, regardless of how deep it is. They do that. What I am more concerned with is the presentation of that fly to the fish. Am I getting the fly ahead of the fly line? Do I have a straight line connection to that fly line? And with sinking line, it's hard because it's easy to get that belly because the line will marry to the water really quickly. Right. So you got to make sure to get that mend. Yep. And I think that's where the trick of that technique comes in is getting that proper presentation. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
That first mend, basically. So you cast out downstream and across, and if you have a spot, you eventually want to, as it's swinging, hit that bucket that's out there, and you want to make your first mend, get it down, and then just get a straight line connection with your, control things as much as possible. So
control.
Yeah, you're getting
control
down.
The drift.
You're getting down close enough to the fish. You don't have to drag the bottom. Close enough, but
you don't.
Yeah, you don't want to be on the surface. You don't want to be you don't want to be just under the surface. I mean, because with summer steelhead, obviously dry flies and things like that, they'll come up for, but you're getting down definitely deeper. I mean, how far below the surface would you say on average you're getting with these lines with the fly?
3 to 4 feet.
Oh yeah. So you're down there. You're down there pretty good.
But I can't tell you how many times I've had fish hit that fly seconds after it's hit the water. Yeah. Just throw it in the right spot, but yeah. Yep. So yeah,
that's it. Okay. Well, I think that gives us a little bit of a, perspective on, is there anything else as far as the Williamson? I mean, I'm sure there's tons of other things. We can get into hatches. We just don't have enough time to get into all there is the aquatic insect, right? You can hit dries and other little wet flies and stuff.
Yeah. The highlight is the hexagenia every year. Yeah. Comes off in the first 2 weeks of July. There's a whole smattering of hatches. I mean, I wouldn't ignore dry flies on that river. It's becoming more and more of a dry fly river to me the longer I'm on it. When I first started, I don't think I threw dry flies for the first 5 years. It was all streamers. But I've kind of... There you go. So...
And that's just fly fishing, right? I mean, as we learn, we always, change. And back to the magazine, I just wanted to hit on this... really quick, just on topics, because you guys cover a bunch of, do you have a feel for what your, maybe your most popular topic or article or what people are requesting out there from you guys in that magazine? Or is it just kind of, you cover a little bit of everything? And
well, we're getting more and more folks, we've been publishing a lot of fiction, poetry, and more essays lately.
And how do you track the response to that? I mean, how do you know if that's kind of resonating?
We have to rely on unsolicited feedback from the readers. So we're not sending out surveys. We just have to wait for that feedback to get to us, or people make comments to me directly.
Yeah.
So this it's a small change for the magazine, but it's really the result of my deputy editor, Henry Hughes, who is a professor at Western Oregon State. He's finding these great writers and poets and sending them my way and helping with the editing and everything. And I have gotten probably more positive feedback since we've been doing this, since I've had the magazine. I mean, people are really enjoying the stories and the poetry and the and the essays. I'm putting in less how-to articles.
So there you go. So that gets back to our how-to thing. That you're actually getting some of the more. Who knows? Maybe in 5 years it's going to be all essays, right?
It's you know what, I'm not sure Frank will let that happen because he's always been kind of against that.
What is Frank? What is Frank? You look at because again, we're not going to have time to dig into this, but what do you think for Frank? What is what's the biggest thing you've learned from Frank over the years? And maybe you could talk a little bit about just him. He seems like such a. I haven't seen a lot of stuff out there on him. I mean, he's a big player out here. But,
little enigmatic, yeah.
Yeah. What's the deal with Frank? Is he a pretty easygoing guy? Is he a guy that's hard to...
so easygoing.
Yeah.
I mean, Frank is the kind of guy that takes his drift boat out by himself and goes and drifts, the Deschutes and steelhead fishes for days and days and days on his own.
That's cool. And how old is he now?
I know he's approaching 80. I don't think he's quite 80 yet.
Yeah. So he's up there in that range. Okay.
But what a kind man. A real sweetheart. Yeah. Where he gets the reputation of being so elusive, I have no idea.
I know. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just because he's so busy. He's hard to track down.
Could be.
But what it is he's on the river fishing for 2 weeks at a time.
That's true.
Without telling you, yeah.
He has a place down on the Nacelle, on the coast, and he is down there. Man, when those fish are in the river, he's at his cabin on the Nacelle, and he just fishes.
There you go.
That's what he does.
There you go. That's really cool. Okay, well, I'm hoping to get Frank on the show, so hopefully if down the line I'll be able to dig into some of this and have him answer some of these questions as well.
Allow 2 hours, yeah.
All right, good.
Show.
So a couple, as we're kind of working down here towards, trying to wrap this thing up, this is a little bit of a struggle for me as well, and it's kind of funny because I have a couple of young daughters who are, totally amazing. But what about the diversity thing in the magazine? I mean, I found that it's been a struggle. I think a lot of my listenership is definitely a good chunk males. Do you guys track that? And are you trying to make your content more diverse? Are you trying to get more female writers? What do you think about that whole topic?
I think it's a ripe topic.
Yeah.
Women are definitely becoming more players in the sport. There's that great book that just came out, 50 angling women.
I can't remember the one of I've had a number of female guests on now, and they're in the couple.
Mia Shepherd,
Mia's in that.
I think is in that. Yeah, Mia's in that, and there is no question. I mean, I heard a statistic that 40% of the anglers across the U.S. are women.
Yeah.
If that's true, where are they? I mean, I don't see them represented, but. I'm looking for more women photographers, women writers. I try to get a greater female presence in the magazine, and we've managed to do that, quite a bit of that.
Oh, cool.
I'd say I appeal. The magazine is really I think Frank thinks of it as a family-friendly magazine, but I think I'm still appealing to an adult audience with the magazine. So our writing level is, a little higher. like maybe high school level or up. And I'm not doing a lot on, I think a kid would struggle with our magazine. A 14, 15-year-old might struggle a little bit with the magazine. But I am very much trying to incorporate more women into the magazine, because I just think it's just, and it's not even a trend, it's just like a realization that, hey, women are doing this sport really, like men are, and we need to be more inclusive.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay. What are there any other kind of resources, books, magazines, things like that you enjoy reading or you'd recommend? Maybe something specific for the Williamson or just in general?
Not for the Williamson, because there's really not a lot out there on it. I mean, nobody publishes fishing reports. There really hasn't been any books written on it. I personally have been reading. I'd have to do book reviews for the magazine, so I read a lot of books that come through. And I'm kind of a fly tying book junkie. I love fly tying books.
Nice.
I always learn something from them, I think, is the reason why I like them so much. But some of the essays and literature, Scott Sandel is one that's been writing recently. He's been writing some nice books. More essay, reflective stuff.
There's a ton. Well, so you have in this book review. So I guess this would be in certain kind of throughout the magazine. But do you guys have any of this online? I mean, you don't have really online content plan, right? As far as the magazine,
we just FlyFishing and Tying Journal and Salmon Trout Steelheader just created websites that are up now.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, we're in the process of getting content on it, so there's not a lot of content on it, but these are really going to be extensions of each of the magazines. We're going to try to get digital versions of the magazines out. This is something that Amato has basically ignored, this trend.
Yep.
And they have now, Nick and Tony are pretty much fully committed to it.
Okay.
So yes, there are websites.
And Nick Amato and Tony?
Yeah, Tony Amato.
Oh,
and Nick Amato.
Okay, so there's right. Gotcha.
Yeah, his sons.
His sons.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Well, we'll keep an eye on that, and as more resources, obviously, that helps. And videos are going to continue getting huge. So who knows? Somebody just recently asked me about a PDF and whether you can, embed a video into a PDF and stuff like that. So I'd imagine, if you're going to stay with it, eventually, people are going to expect to have some of this stuff that, just goes along with the mag. If they don't want to read it. Well, and we've heard that before too. Yeah. People just don't like, for conservation reasons and other reasons, they don't like the paper. I mean, I think a lot of people still do love the paper and probably will always love the paper.
Yeah. But it's such a the whole publishing trends. I mean, it changes really quickly. It does. But I want to see FlyFishing and Tying Journal website really, have a lot of video content, reading content. Make it just as enjoyable, if not more, than the magazine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is your favorite thing about being the editor?
Working and collaborating with the writers and photographers, putting together all of their great writing into one package. I love working with these people. They are hard-working, hard angling writers out there that spend a boatload more time on the water than probably even you and I.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, these people really live and die for the sport, and they are trying to make a statement with their articles and with what they're trying to write, because it's coming. They're writing what they're passionate about, and I love working with these people. I mean, just the exposure to these writers is the best part of the job.
That is cool. What is so it's been a number of years, obviously, this magazine's been out. Are there, past content and all that stuff? Is there a way to get access to, say a magazine from, 15, 20 years ago?
That might be tough.
Yeah, so it's not. I mean, that's the thing that's kind of cool. Like, you think about as things change, if you could put some of that, like an archive of the magazines, maybe
I agree.
Maybe they don't get them right up front, but eventually once they've been out, people can read the magazine, because think of it, all those people, maybe some person that's his only article he's ever published. It'd be cool to have that live somewhere.
Dave, you just came up with a great idea. I mean, not that I haven't thought of it before, but it sounds good.
I know.
When you talk about it that way. I'd love to see that happen. I'm sure it's buried somewhere in some archive. Mm-hmm. It's got to be.
Right, because you have but you don't have a digital version currently.
We do not.
Yeah, you don't.
Not currently.
Yeah, not currently.
We're working to it.
But you're working to it. Yeah, so eventually you will. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's see here. I'll see if I can find a couple of things to wrap this up. I do have, I guess the 222 is a good way to start wrapping it up. I always, your top 2 flies, top 2 tips, top 2 resources. Think about the Williamson. If we're just thinking about the Williamson, so I guess the seal bugger would be one.
It would be.
And what would be your other, if you had to pick one for the rest of time that you on the Williamson?
I'll pick a dry fly. And I'm going to pick a size 8 Matamex.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, with a peacock body or a yellow body. Yeah.
There you go. Okay. And what about your top 2 tips? If you're, again, take that person, they're fishing the Williamson maybe for their first time or two. Any tips you would give them to help them find their first fish out there?
I would say focus on the slow water.
And what is slow? So are we talking a pool, like there's no current at all? Or almost
no, there's current, maybe
not your
1 to 2 miles per hour.
But not your steelhead current. Or is it exactly that steelhead?
Yeah, kind of your steelhead current. Even a little slower, but kind of your edge softer current.
Yep. Okay.
Definitely focus on that water. If it looks like lake water, there's a trout there. And then the second thing I would say is really pay attention to refining your swinging technique. Mm-hmm. Don't take that for granted. Pay attention to what the line is doing in the water. And perfecting that swing will increase your catch rate over someone who just throws it out there and lets it rip across the current.
Right, with the same thing every time.
Yes, and the same retrieve, and I'd say that every pool on the Williamson demands a slight tweaking or nuance in the swing. And when you get to know a river that well, it's such a reward to be able to make those little changes and find success.
Gotcha. Okay. And what about, resources, and you mentioned that there's not a ton for the Williamson, but are there anything else that pops out as far as top 2 resources? It could be Klamath Falls or just maybe fly fishing in general that you'd recommend for somebody?
For this area?
Yeah, something that's not your own. And if you can't think of anything for the Williamson, is there anything bigger, maybe for the Klamath area or Oregon or maybe even?
We have a really active tourism board down here.
Oh, cool.
Klamath Tourism, I think is what it's called.
Yep.
Because there is, and they do give a certain amount of attention to fishing and outdoor stuff here. Because, you have Crater Lake.
Oh, right.
But, we're within a stone's throw of, a couple dozen rivers and reservoirs, all of which hold really good populations of trout. The Saikan, the Shiwakan, the Sprag. There's got to be a half dozen spring creeks all flowing into Klamath Lake and Agency Lake.
So they could help maybe find, camping or just stuff getting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, all that.
Yeah. Klamath Tourism, I believe is what, Discover Klamath is what it's called.
Okay. I'll get a link in the show notes to that. Okay. And then, are there any other, as far as a magazine book, again, if you're going down to that area, what would you say? What would you tell somebody to get prepared for it? Anything they could read or look up or, any?
Gosh, there's just not that much in print.
Yeah. And why is that? Why is there not much? It's such a we talked about all these people, Paulie Rosenberg, all these big names, Dave Hughes.
I know.
I'll bet you Dave's got stuff, but that guy's got to have.
Okay. So in Dave Hughes' book, Wet Fly.
Yeah.
He devotes a whole chapter to Paulie Rossbro when he was down here fishing with him on the river.
Perfect.
That is an extremely valuable chapter. And I would also say read Fly Fishing and Tying the Fuzzy Nymph, which is Paulie's book.
Oh, right.
It's certainly a little dated in terms of fly patterns and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But because no one really uses Paulie's flies down here anymore, it's kind of a shame. I mean, it's kind of a tradition lost.
Which Paulie is that like the Paulie yarn sort of thing? Or what is the
No,
that's separate.
Yeah. So he tied Paulie Rossbro. Paulie's his nickname, E.H. Paulie Rossbro.
Yeah.
Ernest, I think. But he tied the nymph called the Fuzzy Nymph, and he had a way of tying that.
What did that quickly? What did that look like? What's the Fuzzy Nymph look like?
It was a shaggy, dubbed, bodied nymph.
Yeah.
The thing is when he was doing it, no one else had done it. This
so
was
like a hare's ear almost.
Almost like a hare's ear. Yeah.
Yeah.
He kind of invented this whole genre of nymphs, and in the 30s or the 40s.
Oh wow, right. That was
really early.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the thing and that's why it was so unique, because back then people were, talking shit about the nymph fishing, right? Back in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah. He gained the attention of Ernie Schweibert.
Oh yeah.
And Ernie started promoting some of Paulie's flies in some of his books. I think that's really what propelled Paulie to at least some fame, and established him, because he's really the first one on the West Coast to go out and do the entomology, look at the insects, and tie for those insects. And he did all that on the Williamson River.
Oh, there you go.
So
there you go. Okay, yeah. Cool. Well, let's we got that covered. Let's wrap up. As kind of some of my random questions here to wrap this up.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite music or type of music or band you like to listen to?
Jazz.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Been listening to Miles Davis a lot lately.
Oh, cool. Right. The biggest. Yeah. Miles Davis.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Bitches Brew.
Bitches.
That's my album right now. Yeah.
Okay. What about, do you have a bucket list destination, something out there you need to, before we finish things up, you need to get to?
It's a toss up between Alaska and New Zealand.
Yeah.
At one of those two places, Alaska for the abundance of fish, and New Zealand for the sheer difficulty.
Yep. And is the Alaska trip the full on lodge trip, or you want like a remote camp out?
I don't care. I just want to be in the water casting for steelhead.
Gotcha.
Big steelhead.
There you go, for steelhead. All right, for big steelhead, nice.
Yeah.
All right. How about? Are you a big movie buff? Do you watch movies? Yeah. What's do you have a favorite movie that kind of throughout your life that you think pops in?
I got to say, and it may be a cliche, but Pulp Fiction was it.
Oh, damn.
I mean,
I know.
Everything, that begins and ends with that.
That was ridiculous. That movie, when I first saw that, it was, it was so hardcore. It was like, damn, this thing is great.
We didn't know. I can just remember sitting in the theater. We just didn't know what we were watching.
I know.
This is crazy.
I know. You know what's cool about it? What I love about that movie, too, is I've always loved John Travolta. And it was the first time I saw John Travolta in this really totally different character. Well, maybe he's done it, but it was awesome to see him like just killing it on a new crazy Quentin Tarantino freak movie. Yeah, that's a good call.
Right. Yeah, and his new one's pretty good. I went out and saw it.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. What's it called?
I'm not even sure. I'm not
Hollywood.
I haven't even been keeping up on movies at all.
Yeah, it just released the new Tarantino.
Okay.
Yeah, go see
new
it.
Tarantino. Okay, and with Travolta.
No, not with Travolta. Yeah, it's Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio.
There you go. I'm gonna. I'll find. I'll put a link to a trailer for that one, because I don't know what that is, but Perfect. All right. Well, I think we kind of touched on most everything. Anything else, about the magazine you want to touch on that we missed or anything, before we let you go?
We love feedback.
Yeah.
I mean, if you got feedback, either positive or negative, let us know. We pay attention. We listen to it. We incorporate suggestions. We want to know what's working and what's not working. And
what would be do you have if somebody wanted to provide some feedback, how would they do that?
Well, they could go to, FTJ editor at amatobooks.com is a great way to give us feedback. You can call Amato.
Cool.
There's links on the website.
All right. The FTJ editor at amatobooks.com. And if somebody does send some feedback, maybe they can just note Wet Fly Swing podcast, just so we know maybe some of it. Some of it came.
That'd be perfect
from this way, and we can track that a little bit. Craig. Well, that's all I have for you. I mean, in the next 6 to 12 months, anything you want to note new coming up for you or the magazine, or any, personally or professionally?
I'm pretty satisfied right now. I'll just keep doing what I'm doing and improving the magazine and getting great content in there. And really personal goal, I'd like to get out and fish more, frankly.
That's right.
I spend so much time guiding and writing about it that I don't get to do it a lot.
That's right. What is your guiding season? Like, when do you start it? When do you finish it? And
so 4th Saturday of May through the end of October.
Oh, 4th Saturday through the end of October. So that's it. So basically come after October. And I think you had your side gig was kind of a kids thing, right?
I work for a nonprofit down here in Klamath Falls, and we help at-risk and homeless youth.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
It's called Integral Youth Services.
No kidding.
Yeah.
How is that? That must be pretty rewarding, pretty challenging.
It is. It's, I've been in when I haven't been fishing all my career, I've been in nonprofit work. And so it's just where I kind of fit. And, I mean, it has its challenges, funding and everything else. But definitely a lot of kids out there that need help.
Oh, yeah.
So.
No, I know. That's good. Well, I appreciate that's awesome stuff, Craig. All right. Well, if we mentioned the email, and then guided waters flyfishing.com if they have questions or want to get a guide trip with you down there. And
you bet.
All right. Well, thanks, Craig, for coming on. And
Dave, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, doing what you do. I've had fun. We've gone off some tangents. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff we haven't covered yet. So we'll keep in touch and maybe get you back on down the line and kind of go from there.
Sounds good.
All right, man.
Thank you, Dave.
All right. See ya.
Bye-bye.
So there you go. If you want to find all the show notes, all the links we cover, just go to wetflyswing.com/Craig. That's CRAIG. Are you interested in heading out on a fishing trip of a lifetime with me and a few of the guests from the podcast? There are still a few slots this upcoming summer. You can check out some info there at wetflyswing.com/destination. That's DESTI Nation to find out more on the next big trip. I want to thank you again for stopping by to check out the show today. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to maybe seeing you online or on the river.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.